Millionaire Nathaniel Callahan sat alone at a table meant for two, untouched wine catching the light like an accusation. The waiter had stopped asking if he'd like to keep waiting. 40 minutes. No message. No explanation. Just whispers from nearby tables. The man who got stood up. He reached for his coat, pride stiff in his chest, when a small voice broke through the silence. "Sir, my mom's sorry she's late." Every head turned. A girl in a faded yellow dress stood beside him, clutching a wrinkled note in both hands. And that's when everything stopped. Elena Ruiz had learned early that silence could keep you safe. Safe from pity, from gossip, from the sharp looks that came when people realized you cleaned their floors for a living. Every morning in her tiny apartment on Chicago's South Side, she woke before sunrise, packed her daughter Sophia's school lunch, and whispered the same words: "We don't bow, we don't break." She worked 6 days a week at the Rivera estate, polishing marble staircases she could never climb, setting crystal glasses that cost more than her month's rent. The family treated her with polite distance, and that was fine. Distance was easy. Distance didn't hurt. Her hands carried the stories of every job she'd taken, dishwashing, caregiving, cleaning, but never begging. She told Sophia that work, no matter how small, had its own kind of pride. Still, there were nights when Elena wondered what life would have been if she hadn't left her nursing studies after Sophia's father disappeared. Those thoughts never lasted long. She didn't have the luxury of what if, only what now. That week, an extra cleaning shift at an upscale downtown restaurant appeared like a small miracle. $80 for a single night. Enough to cover school shoes and bus fare? Sophia begged to come along for a while, saying she'd do homework in a corner until the babysitter arrived. Elena almost said no. But when she looked at her daughter's eager face, half courage, half innocence, she nodded. She didn't know that the same restaurant was where a millionaire, tired of people who lied for attention, was waiting for someone who would tell him the truth, and that truth was walking right toward him, holding her daughter's hand. Elena had never been inside Le Chantier before. The restaurant shimmered like another world. Soft light on polished silver, perfume drifting through the air like money you couldn't touch. She'd been called that afternoon by Mrs. Rivera herself. "One of our regular staff is sick. You're reliable, Elena. Could you step in for the evening? We'll pay double. That meant Sophia's school field trip and maybe a real winter coat before December. So she said yes. By the time they arrived, Sophia's babysitter was still on the bus, delayed by traffic. The maitre d' allowed Sophia to sit quietly at the back, near the service station, until pickup. Elena promised it would be only for a few minutes. Across the room, Nathaniel Callahan sat at a corner table. His mother's newest matchmaking effort, a blind date with a family friend's niece, was supposed to restore his reputation as Chicago's most eligible philanthropist. Nate didn't care. He'd come out of respect, not hope. While Elena checked table linens and set wine glasses, she noticed him. The man waiting, checking his watch, eyes shadowed with impatience. She didn't know his name, only that he looked like he belonged to the kind of world she scrubbed clean. Sophia watched too, curious about the man who seemed lonely even in a room full of people. Minutes passed. The seat across from him stayed empty. Staff began to whisper. A small, wrinkled note lay tucked inside Elena's apron pocket, one she meant to give the restaurant manager, running 10 minutes late. "My daughter's with me. Thank you for understanding." But when Sophia saw the man alone, his untouched drink, his glance toward the door, she thought she recognized kindness. And in one innocent decision, the world was about to tilt. The evening had slipped into that awkward quiet that only expensive places know, where forks pause mid-air and whispers fill the spaces left by disappointment. Nathaniel Callahan's jaw tightened as he stared at the empty seat across from him. 40 minutes late. 40 minutes of polite pity from waiters who pretended not to notice. He'd had enough. He signaled for the check, but before the waiter could reach him, a soft, small voice rose from below the linen-draped tables. "Sir, my mom's sorry she's late." A girl, maybe 9, stood beside him, holding a crumpled note, her backpack sliding off one shoulder. Her dark hair was tied with a mismatched ribbon. Around them, conversation stopped like someone had pressed mute. Nate blinked. "Excuse me?" "She said to give you this." Sophia held out the paper. Her little hands trembled, but her eyes were steady, the same way her mother had taught her. The waiter frowned, stepping forward. "Miss, you can't be—" Before anyone could move, Elena appeared from the service hallway, breathless, face flushed with panic. "Sophia, what are you doing?" Too late. Nate had already unfolded the note. "I'm sorry, I'm late. My daughter was sick." A ripple of laughter swept through the nearby tables. Someone whispered, "Is this his date?" Another smirked. "Guess he likes them young, single moms and all." Nate's expression darkened. Not anger, confusion, disbelief. The girl looked up at him like he was supposed to understand. Elena tried to explain, but her words tangled over the sound of chuckles and silverware clinking in mock applause. "I work here," she said quietly, her voice trembling. She just misunderstood. That note wasn't— The maitre d' stepped in, voice sharp as glass. "Madam, this establishment is not for personal drama." "Kindly remove the child." Elena's face burned. Sophia's eyes filled, but she refused to cry. She reached for her mother's hand, whispering, "I was just trying to help." The humiliation cut deeper than any insult. Elena straightened, her pride her only shield. "We're leaving," she said, gathering her things with shaking fingers. As she turned to go, Nate's gaze followed her, long after the laughter faded. Something in her silence unsettled him. He'd seen arrogance before. This wasn't that. This was dignity, bleeding quietly in public. Nathaniel didn't move right away. He just sat there, the note still open in his hand, the words, "My daughter was sick," staring back like an accusation. Around him, laughter turned back into chatter, comfortable again now that the show was over. He'd been to 100 dinners like this. Dinners where people wore masks of courtesy and wielded cruelty like silver forks. But this was different. The woman who'd just walked out with her daughter hadn't flinched like others would. She hadn't begged or apologized. She had only gathered her child and her pride and left. Something in that restraint pressed on him harder than pity ever could. Nate glanced toward the maitre d', who was already muttering to the staff. "Unacceptable. She'll never work here again," he said under his breath. The name tag she'd worn flickered in his memory. Elena. He'd seen it before, somewhere he couldn't place. He asked quietly, "That woman, where does she work?" The maitre d' hesitated. "She's a temp from the Rivera estate staff, sir." Tonight was just a favor. Nate froze. Rivera estate, his mother's estate. The realization hit like a slow echo. That meant Elena worked for Vivian Callahan, the same woman who had arranged this entire dinner. His mother's family friend's niece was supposed to show up, but never did. And somehow this maid had walked straight into the fallout. He looked again at the note. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost gentle. He imagined her rushing from job to job, apologizing to everyone but herself. Nate stood up, his chair scraping softly against marble. "Cancel the check," he said. "And send a message to Rivera House. I want to know her schedule tomorrow." The waiter blinked. "Sir, just do it." As he walked out into the cold Chicago night, his reflection followed him in every dark window, alone, polished, but hollow. He'd spent years surrounded by people who said all the right things for the wrong reasons. But that woman, with her shaking hands and quiet strength, hadn't said a word that wasn't true, and somehow that truth had cut deeper than any insult. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Callahan wanted to understand someone who had nothing to gain from being understood. Elena was nearly at the door when the maitre d' called after her, his voice sharp and self-satisfied. "Next time, ma'am, try to keep your personal life outside of professional spaces." Heads turned again. Laughter stirred, low and mean, but before Elena could respond, another voice rose behind her, calm, steady, and unmistakably authoritative. "That's enough." Every sound in the restaurant fell silent. Nathaniel Callahan was standing, coat still over his arm, eyes fixed on the maitre d'. "She's not at fault. She's with me." A ripple of confusion spread through the room. Someone whispered, "With him?" Nate walked toward Elena and Sophia, the distance between wealth and work closing with every step. He stopped beside them. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said evenly. "She's my guest tonight," the maitre d' stammered. "Mr. Callahan, I didn't realize." "I'm sure you didn't." Nate's tone was polite, but cold enough to silence the man. He turned to Elena. "You and your daughter haven't eaten. Please sit." Elena blinked, her pride warring with humiliation. "Sir, that isn't necessary." "It is," he said quietly. "For me." Something in his eyes told her this wasn't pity. It was apology, in the only language men like him were ever taught. Public gestures. Reluctantly, she sat. Sophia looked between them wide-eyed. "Mom, can we order fries?" she whispered. That small, ordinary question broke the tension like sunlight through fog. Nate smiled despite himself. "Fries it is." The staff scrambled to make amends, menus appeared, and whispered gossip turned into awkward silence. But as the three of them sat together under the soft glow of chandeliers, Elena knew nothing about this night would ever be simple again, and Nathaniel Callahan realized, for once, he didn't want it to be. The next morning, the story had already reached the penthouse breakfast table. Vivian Callahan set down her tablet, the headline glaring up at her. Millionaire Nathaniel Callahan defends Maid in awkward restaurant scene. Her voice was smooth as porcelain. "So this is what you do now? Turn charity dinners into circus acts?" Nate poured coffee unbothered. "It wasn't a scene, it was a correction." Vivian's tone sharpened. "You humiliated the staff, the restaurant, and yourself. Defending help publicly makes you look naive, not noble." "That woman should have known her place." He looked up at her, eyes cool. "Her place? You mean working 12-hour days so people like us can complain about fingerprints on glassware?" Vivian's fingers froze mid-air. "Don't exaggerate. They're paid well for what they do." "They're paid to disappear, Mother," he said, voice rising just enough to cut through her calm. "To clean the dirt without being seen. To raise kids who believe they'll never belong anywhere else. And you call that balance?" She straightened, all grace and control. "Nathaniel, our name carries weight. You cannot afford to throw it around for emotional whims." "I didn't throw it around," he said quietly. "For once, I used it for something that mattered." Vivian's eyes softened for half a second, something close to fear passing through. "You sound just like your father when he started mixing guilt with charity." Nate didn't answer. He just placed his cup down, steady and final. "She's not a story, Mother. She's a person, and I'd rather be embarrassed for doing what's right than admired for pretending not to see." He left before she could reply. Behind him, the silence felt heavier than any insult, because for the first time, Vivian Callahan wasn't sure she was still right. By the end of the week, Elena had made her decision. She could no longer work at the Rivera estate, at least not with her dignity intact. Word had spread quickly. The maître d's gossip reached the staff. The staff whispered to drivers, and soon enough, everyone at the Callahan residence knew. The maid who embarrassed Mr. Callahan at Le Chantier, so Eleanor came early Saturday morning when the house was still quiet. She left her keys and ID badge neatly on the marble counter, along with a short note. "Thank you for the opportunity. Please forward my last paycheck." Elena Ruiz. She was almost at the front door when she heard footsteps, leaving without saying goodbye. Nathaniel's voice was calm but weighted. He was dressed casually, hands in his pockets, eyes unreadable. Elena turned, her throat tight. "I didn't want to cause more trouble." "You didn't," he said. "My mother did." She shook her head. "No, I did. By stepping into a room that wasn't mine." He frowned. "Don't say that." Her voice broke, low and even. "You think what you did that night was kindness. But for me, kindness always comes with a cost. People remember it, twist it, whisper about it until it sounds like shame. I can't afford shame, Mr. Callahan. Not when I still have to teach my daughter how to stand tall." He was quiet for a moment, then reached into his jacket and held out something small, a worn plastic bus card. "You dropped this that night," he said softly. "It's loaded. 2 rides left." Eleanor stared at it, her pride and gratitude locked in silent war. "I can pay you back." "It's not about the fare," he said. "It's about making sure you get where you're going." Their eyes met. 2 people from opposite sides of the city, bound for a moment by something that neither could name. Elena took the card, her fingers brushing his just once. "Thank you," she whispered, not for the card, but for seeing her when everyone else had looked away. Nathaniel nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "Then don't disappear, Elena." She didn't answer, but something in her silence told him she wouldn't. 2 weeks passed before their paths crossed again, this time not by accident. The Callahan Foundation was preparing its annual Bridge the Future charity event, a tech mentorship program for underfunded schools across Chicago. Elena's name appeared on the event roster, not as a maid, but as a temporary project assistant. Vivian Callahan hadn't approved it. The program director had. "She's organized, discreet, and the students love her energy," the email read. Nathaniel didn't argue. He only smiled faintly and said, "She'll do fine." When Elena arrived at the foundation office, she wore her best blouse, neatly pressed, and a second-hand blazer she'd tailored herself. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Nathaniel waiting by the conference table. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said cautiously. He smiled, a little rueful. "Neither did my mother." Their tasks were simple but demanding, coordinating logistics, checking vendor quotes, reviewing scholarship applications. For hours they worked side by side, speaking little but understanding much. He noticed how methodical she was, how she double-checked every figure before sending it off. She noticed how he listened to every intern, every assistant, every voice most people ignored. At lunch, Sophia stopped by after school, proudly handing Nate a crayon drawing of the man who helped Mom. He taped it beside his laptop without a word. There was no flirtation, no soft music or knowing glances, just quiet cooperation and the slow, surprising comfort of 2 people who no longer needed to prove anything. By the end of the week, their names appeared together on the event's final credits list. Event co-coordinators Nathaniel Callahan and Elena Ruiz. It wasn't meant to be symbolic, but it was, because for the first time, both of them were working towards something that didn't belong to just one world, but both. The day before the gala, Elena stayed late at the foundation office, sorting last-minute donation records. Nathaniel lingered too, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, a version of him she hadn't seen before. For a while they worked in companionable silence until he said quietly, "You know, I used to think money fixed everything." Elena glanced up. "And now," he gave a small, tired laugh, "now I know it only hides what's broken. You learn to build walls instead of fixing the cracks." Her fingers stilled on the spreadsheet. "I used to think work fixed everything, but all it does is keep the lights on. It doesn't stop people from looking at you like you're furniture." Their eyes met. For a moment, the divide between them felt smaller, like 2 people standing on opposite sides of the same cracked bridge. He leaned back in his chair. "My mother built this empire from fear of losing status, losing control. I built mine from guilt, trying to prove I wasn't just her reflection." Elena's voice softened. "And I built mine from necessity, trying to prove to Sophia that survival doesn't mean surrender." He smiled faintly. "So we're both engines running on pressure," she nodded. "Yours gilded, mine invisible, but they both burn the same." The words hung between them, quiet and true. For the first time, Nate didn't see her as someone he'd rescued, or as a symbol of decency in a corrupt world. He saw her as his equal in endurance, and for the first time, Elena didn't see him as untouchable wealth or pity in a suit, just a man still trying to earn his own peace. Some truths don't divide people. They reveal how alike their prisons really are. That night, both left the office changed, though neither would admit it yet. The gala shimmered with everything Elena once believed defined success. Glass chandeliers, velvet gowns, polite laughter that sounded like applause rehearsed in advance. She moved quietly among the crowd, clipboard in hand, ensuring everything ran smoothly. When Nathaniel took the stage to deliver his speech, she stayed near the back, unseen but alert. But trouble never announces itself. It arrives dressed as charm. A well-known donor, Harold Vance, approached her near the hors d'oeuvres table, smiling with thin politeness. "You must be the woman everyone's whispering about, the maid who made headlines with Mr. Callahan." Elena froze. "I'm just here to work, sir." He chuckled. "Work? Or work your way up? Clever move, really, the sympathy angle." A few guests turned, listening. Heat rose to her face, but this time she didn't lower her eyes. "I'm proud of what I do," she said steadily. "Cleaning, organizing, coordinating, none of it makes me smaller. Only smaller minds think that way." The room stilled. The man's smirk faltered. Then another voice joined in, calm and clear. "She's right." Nathaniel stood a few feet away, microphone still in hand. The crowd turned toward him. "For those wondering," he said evenly, "Elena Ruiz isn't a scandal. She's the reason this event exists tonight. She built the bridge we're all standing on, while most of us just talk about helping." Whispers turned into silence. Cameras clicked. Vivian Callahan, standing near the front, looked as if the floor had shifted beneath her. Elena didn't move, didn't speak. She didn't need to, because in that moment, before donors, executives, and the very world that once dismissed her, she no longer stood as the maid who embarrassed the Callahans. She stood as a woman who had reclaimed her name, her worth, and her voice. And Nathaniel, for the first time, looked proud, not of himself, but of her. A month later, Elena sat at a small table by the window of a modest neighborhood cafe. The air smelled of brewed coffee and rain-soaked pavement, ordinary, safe hers. Across from her, Sophia was doing homework, tongue peeking out in concentration. The door chimed, and Nathaniel stepped in. No suit, no entourage, just a paper bag in hand. Inside was a simple frame. "I thought you might want this back," he said quietly. She opened it. Inside, under glass, was the wrinkled note, the same one Sophia had handed him that night at the restaurant. The creases were still there, the ink slightly smudged, but beneath it he'd added a small line in careful handwriting. "Never late. Just on time to change everything." Elena smiled, her eyes soft. "You kept it." "I learned from it," he said. "About what really matters." They didn't need to say more. Sophia tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom, can we put it on our wall?" Elena nodded. "We will. It'll remind us that dignity doesn't wait for permission." As Nathaniel left, the bell above the door jingled softly, and Elena watched him go, not as the man who saved her, but as the man who finally understood her. The note gleamed in the afternoon light, no longer an apology, but a promise kept. Sometimes dignity doesn't come from wealth, status, or the loudness of your name. It comes from standing tall when the world expects you to shrink. Elena didn't change her life overnight. She changed its meaning. And Nathaniel didn't rescue her. He learned what it truly means to see someone. That night at the restaurant began with humiliation and ended with understanding. A note written in haste became a symbol of grace, because sometimes the smallest gestures, an apology, a bus fare, a shared meal, can bridge worlds that money never could. If this story made you feel something, remember, respect costs nothing, but it can rewrite everything. And maybe the next time you see someone quietly holding their ground, you'll think of a little girl who walked into a restaurant and said, "My mom's sorry she's late." She wasn't late at all. She was right on time.